Okay, so today we're diving into the serverless workflow DSL,
Oh, yeah.
which is, uh, I guess, kind of like a blueprint for building these automated processes in a serverless world.
Yeah, definitely.
It's way cooler than it sounds, though.
Absolutely.
Like, just think about ordering a pet online.
Okay. Yeah.
Every step from browsing to delivery can be automated using this language.
Yeah.
And we've got a stack of technical documents defining it. So
Cool.
let's unpack what makes it so powerful and see what we can learn.
That sounds awesome.
So,
I think what's really fascinating about this DSL is how it brings this much-needed structure to serverless functions.
oh, okay.
You know how sometimes serverless projects can just feel like a tangled mess of code?
Right, yeah.
This DSL lets you orchestrate those functions with a clear purpose.
Okay.
It's like a well-organized recipe instead of just a pile of ingredients.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks.
And speaking of recipes,
Yeah.
the DSL starts by defining workflows,
Yeah.
which is basically laying out the steps of our recipe. One of the key ingredients here is the document property.
Oh, yeah. Documentation is usually an afterthought, but
Right.
with the serverless workflow DSL, it's baked right in.
Yeah.
This makes workflows so much easier to understand and maintain.
Oh, for sure.
You won't be tearing your hair out trying to figure out what your code does 6 months down the line.
Yeah, no kidding.
You've also got properties like input, use, and do to control the flow of data
Okay.
and the actual tasks within the workflow.
So let's stick with that recipe analogy for a second.
Okay, sure.
Imagine you're building a workflow for that pet order example from the docs.
Yeah.
You could define each step, browsing, adding to cart checkout payment, all the way to shipping, as tasks in your workflow.
Exactly. And this is where the concept of reusable components really shines.
Okay.
Think about common tasks like authentication or error handling.
Right.
Wouldn't it be amazing if you could just plug in pre-built blocks of code instead of reinventing the wheel every time?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The DSL lets you do just that. By defining these reusable bits as functions,
Okay.
it's all about efficiency.
So it's like having a library of pre-made code snippets
Yeah.
that you can just drop into your workflow whenever you need them.
Exactly.
That could save a ton of time and headaches.
Absolutely. And to make things even more efficient,
Okay.
the DSL supports scheduling.
Oh, cool.
You can set up a workflow to trigger at specific times or even in response to external events.
Interesting.
The cron property lets you use those familiar cron expressions for time-based triggers.
Right.
So you can have your workflow run like clockwork.
Hold on. Cron expressions. Those are those cryptic strings that schedule tasks, right?
You and everyone else,
I have to look them up.
they can be a bit intimidating.
Yeah.
But the good news is there are plenty of tools and resources to help you build them.
Okay. That makes me feel better.
Good.
But what about triggering workflows based on events? Is that where the on property comes in?
Right on the on property is where things get really interesting.
Oh.
Imagine a workflow that automatically kicks off when a new customer signs up on your platform,
Oh, wow.
or when an item is added to the shopping cart in your pet store example.
Right.
That's the power of event-driven automation.
So it's like a chain reaction. One event triggers another, and the DSL lets you orchestrate this whole chain of events.
Precisely. And the beauty is that it's all defined in a clear, structured way.
Okay, we've got our workflow defined and scheduled.
Yeah.
But what about the actual work that needs to be done?
Sure.
I'm guessing that's where tasks come in.
You got it. Tasks are the heart of any workflow.
Okay.
The DSL offers a whole toolbox of different task types, each designed for a specific job.
Interesting.
There are tasks for calling functions, running sequential tasks, sending events,
Okay.
and a whole bunch more.
Whoa, that's a lot of tasks.
Yeah.
It sounds like the DSL covers just about every scenario you could imagine.
It aims to be pretty comprehensive,
Yeah.
but don't worry, you don't need to memorize every single task type.
Okay.
What's important is understanding the concept that each task type is a tool designed to handle a particular scenario.
Okay, that makes sense.
Good.
So it's like having a Swiss Army knife of automation tools.
Exactly.
Can we dive into a specific example of a task type and how it might be used?
Sure. One of the most interesting task types is the fork task.
Okay.
It lets you run multiple tasks simultaneously.
Interesting.
Imagine being able to process an order and notify the customer simultaneously.
Oh, wow.
That's the power of fork.
Wait, hold on. That sounds like multitasking for code.
Yeah.
How does that actually work?
Why?
Is it running on multiple servers at once or something?
Not necessarily multiple servers, but it's definitely a form of parallel processing.
Okay.
Think of it like this. When a fork task is encountered,
Yeah.
the workflow splits into multiple branches, each running its own set of tasks concurrently.
Okay.
Once all the branches are completed, the the workflow converges back together.
Wow, that's pretty powerful.
It is.
It opens up a whole new level of efficiency and responsiveness.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see how this DSL could be a game changer for automating complex processes.
It definitely is. And to make things even easier,
Okay.
the DSL provides built-in default functions for common actions, like making HTTP requests.
Oh, that's fantastic.
You don't have to write all the code yourself. It's like having a shortcut for the most frequently used tasks.
I'm guessing HTTP call and OpenAPI call are some of the most popular default functions,
Yeah, right.
especially since APIs are everywhere these days.
HTTP and OpenAPI calls are bread and butter for web services.
Right?
There's also support for more niche protocols like Async API and gRPC.
Good.
But let's stick to what you'll likely use most.
Okay.
Good old HTTP and its more structured friend, OpenAPI.
Okay, so we've covered workflows, tasks, and even reusable components.
Yeah,
But what happens when things go wrong?
right.
Does the DSL just throw its hands up in the air and say, I give up?
Not at all. The DSL has a solid approach to error handling. Much like traditional programming,
Right.
you can define try and catch blocks to gracefully handle errors
Okay.
and ensure your workflows don't crash at the first sign of trouble.
Yeah.
The ticket processing example in the documentation is a great illustration of how to deal with different priority tickets,
Right.
even when errors occur.
So it's like having a safety net for your workflows.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm all about making things less painful, especially when it comes to error handling.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that makes this DSL stand out?
One of the coolest things about the DSL is the concept of extensions.
Okay.
It's like adding plugins to your workflows, giving them extra capabilities
Oh, cool.
beyond the built-in tasks and functions.
Interesting.
You can use extensions for things like logging, mocking external services, or even integrating with specialized systems.
Extensions. That sounds intriguing.
Yeah,
Can you give me an example of how an extension might be used?
absolutely. Imagine you're developing a workflow that interacts with an external API.
Yeah.
You could use an extension to intercept those API calls
Uh,
and mock the responses during development and testing.
Gotcha.
This can be super handy for situations where the real API isn't available,
Right.
or you want to test specific scenarios without actually hitting the live service.
Wow, that's incredibly useful.
It is.
It's like having a virtual stunt double for your API calls.
Exactly, and that's just scratching the surface of what's possible with extensions.
Wow.
They provide a powerful way to extend the functionality of the DSL without having to modify its core.
So we've got workflows, task functions, error handling, and even extensions.
We do.
This DSL is shaping up to be quite the automation powerhouse.
It really is.
But what about handling events?
Yeah,
How does the DSL deal with the asynchronous nature of the serverless world?
that's where event handling comes in.
Okay.
And the GSL embraces the asynchronous world by allowing workflows to react to different event scenarios.
Interesting.
It uses the event consumption strategy to define how a workflow should respond to various events.
Okay. Event consumption strategy. That sounds pretty technical. Can we break that down a bit?
Sure.
What does it actually mean in practical terms?
Let's imagine a chat room example.
Okay.
You can use the filter and consume properties to control how messages are processed.
Gotcha.
For instance, you might only want to process messages from specific users
Right.
or messages containing certain keywords.
So it's like having a bouncer at the door of your workflow, deciding which events are allowed in and which ones get turned away.
That's a great way to put it. And it highlights the level of control you have
Yeah.
over how your workflows react to the constant stream of events in a serverless environment.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. And that ability to filter and control those events
Yeah.
is key to building those truly reactive systems,
Yeah.
the ones that can adapt to changing conditions.
Okay, so we've seen how this DSL handles workflows, tasks, and events in a pretty impressive way.
Yeah.
It's clear that it brings a lot of structure and power to the world of serverless automation. But how does it all actually work in practice?
Okay.
I mean, we've got these workflows defined in this DSL,
Yeah.
but what makes them run?
That's where serverless workflow runtimes come in.
Okay,
Think of them as the engines that power your workflows.
okay,
They take the DSL code you've written,
right.
parse it, manage the state of your workflows, and orchestrate the execution of all those tasks we talked about.
So it's not like I write a workflow in this DSL and then it magically runs on its own.
Right.
There's an actual runtime environment that needs to be involved.
Exactly.
It's like having a conductor leading the orchestra of serverless functions,
Yeah.
making sure they all play together in harmony.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks.
The runtime handles all the behind-the-scenes magic, ensuring that tasks are executed in the right order,
Right.
that data is passed between them correctly, and that everything runs smoothly even when dealing with those asynchronous events
Yeah.
and long-running operations.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But it also raises another question. If I build a workflow with this DSL,
Yeah,
how easily can I move it between different runtime environments?
right.
What if I decide to switch cloud providers or use a different workflow engine?
Sure.
Wouldn't that be a major headache?
Portability is definitely a key consideration.
Okay.
One of the main goals of the serverless workflow DSL is to promote portability across different platforms.
Gotcha.
It aims to be a standardized language that's not tied to any particular vendor or technology.
That's reassuring to hear.
Oh.
So in theory, I could take my DSL workflow and run it on different runtimes without having to rewrite everything from scratch.
Ideally, yes.
Awesome.
Of course, there might be minor tweaks or adjustments needed depending on the specific features and capabilities of each runtime.
Okay.
But the core workflow logic should remain portable.
Gotcha.
It's like being able to take your musical score and have it performed by different orchestras.
Right.
The essence of the music remains the same,
Yeah.
even though the interpretation might vary slightly.
I like that analogy. It makes the idea of portability much more concrete.
Good.
So this DSL strikes a good balance between providing a clear structure for defining workflows
Yeah,
while also offering the flexibility to adapt to different environments.
exactly. It's about giving developers the tools they need to build robust and portable workflows
Right.
without being constrained by a rigid set of rules.
Speaking of real-world use cases,
Sure.
we've talked about the pet store and hospital examples,
They have.
but what are some other scenarios where this serverless workflow DSL would really shine?
The possibilities are vast.
Okay.
Think about e-commerce platforms processing orders,
Right.
financial institutions handling transactions,
Yeah.
media companies managing content workflows, or even those smart devices in your home reacting to sensor data.
So any scenario where you have a series of steps that need to be executed in a specific order,
Yeah.
potentially involving multiple services and events,
Right.
could benefit from this DSL?
Precisely. And as serverless architectures continue to gain popularity,
Yeah.
the need for a language like the serverless workflow DSL will only become more apparent.
Yeah, for sure.
It provides a way to manage the complexity of these distributed systems
Right.
without getting lost in a sea of individual functions and events.
Now, we've explored the technical side of this DSL quite a bit,
Yeah.
but I'm curious about the human element.
Okay.
Who are the typical users or developers who work with this DSL?
Sure.
Is it strictly for hardcore programmers?
Okay.
Or can mere mortals like me wrap our heads around it?
Well, the DSL does require some technical understanding.
Okay.
It's not just for software engineers.
Okay.
Anyone involved in the designing or automating processes,
Right.
whether they're business analysts, DevOps engineers, or even technically minded business users, can benefit from using this DSL.
So it's not just about writing code.
Right.
It's about defining logic and orchestrating actions.
Yeah.
Which could involve people from various backgrounds.
Absolutely. And as visual workflow designers become more integrated with the DSL, it will become even more accessible to a wider audience.
Interesting.
Imagine being able to drag and drop tasks and visually map out your workflows.
Yeah.
That would make it much easier for non-programmers to get involved in the automation process.
That's an exciting prospect.
It is.
It's great to see technology becoming more inclusive and empowering people from different disciplines to contribute to the development process.
Absolutely.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yep.
But before we move on to the final part,
Sure.
I'm curious about the DSL's capabilities when it comes to handling state within a workflow.
Okay.
We know it can handle sequential tasks, parallel tasks, and event-driven actions.
Right.
But does it have mechanisms for managing and persisting the state of a workflow as it progresses?
That's a great question.
Right.
And a crucial aspect of any workflow engine.
Yeah.
The serverless workflow DSL tackles this through the concept of workflow data
Okay.
or context. Think of it like a shared memory space for your workflow. As each task does its thing, it can read and write information to this data context,
Okay.
essentially capturing the current state of the workflow.
So it's like having a whiteboard
Yeah.
where each step of the workflow can jot down notes or update information
exactly.
for the next step to see.
This data context is like a running log of what's happened so far.
Right.
It allows information to be passed between tasks,
Okay.
enabling the workflow to make decisions based on its current state.
Gotcha.
For instance, in our pet store example,
Yeah.
the data context might hold information about the chosen pet,
Right.
the customer's address, the
Right.
order ID, and so on.
Yeah.
Each task can access and update this information as needed.
And this data context sticks around throughout the entire workflow, right?
Absolutely.
Even if there are pauses or hiccups along the way.
The runtime environment we talked about earlier is responsible for managing the persistence of this data,
Right.
ensuring it's available even if the workflow is paused, resumed, or encounters errors. It's like having a super reliable note-taker who never loses track of the details.
Okay, that makes sense. It ensures the workflow always picks up where it left off with all the relevant state information intact.
Exactly.
So we've covered portability across runtimes, but what about interoperability with other systems or services?
Right.
Can this DSL play nicely with the tools and technologies I'm already using?
That's another strong point of the serverless workflow DSL.
Okay.
It leverages the power of open standards,
Right.
especially cloud events, for communication and integration.
Yeah.
By using cloud events, workflows can easily interact with event-driven architectures,
Okay.
messaging systems, and other cloud-native services.
So it's not a walled garden.
No, not at all.
It's designed to work within the broader landscape of cloud-native technologies, which is a huge plus.
Exactly. This interoperability is crucial in today's world,
For sure.
where systems are becoming more interconnected and distributed. You
Right.
don't want to be stuck with a workflow language that only works with a limited set of tools.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive into the serverless workflow DSL.
It has.
We've seen how it addresses a real need in the serverless world, providing a structured yet flexible language for automating processes.
Right.
But like any technology, I'm sure there are trade-offs or limitations to consider.
Yeah, there are.
What are some things to keep in mind when deciding if this DSL is the right fit for a project?
One thing to consider is the maturity of the DSL and its ecosystem.
Okay.
While it's rapidly evolving,
Right.
it's still relatively young compared to more established workflow languages or orchestration tools.
So there might be a steeper learning curve or fewer readily available resources compared to those more mature technologies.
That's something to be aware of, however.
Okay.
The community is incredibly active and supportive,
Yeah,
and resources are growing rapidly.
that's great.
Another thing to consider is the DSL's complexity.
Okay.
While it strives for clarity, it can get quite detailed, especially for larger workflows.
Right.
It's important to choose the right tool for the job.
So for simpler automation tasks, it might be overkill to bring in this DSL.
Exactly. It's worth evaluating whether the structure and features of the DSL align with the complexity of your needs.
Right.
Sometimes a simpler scripting approach might be sufficient.
Gotcha.
But for scenarios that demand robustness, scalability, and complex event handling,
Yeah.
the DSL can be a powerful asset. It's like choosing between a Swiss Army knife and a simple pocket knife.
Okay.
Both have their uses,
Yeah.
but you wouldn't use a Swiss Army knife to open a letter.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what excites you most about the future of the serverless workflow DSL?
What excites me is the potential for this DSL to become the go-to standard for orchestrating serverless workflows.
Okay.
Its focus on open standards, portability, and extensibility sets a strong foundation for a vibrant and collaborative ecosystem.
Awesome.
I think we'll see more and more tools and platforms embracing this DSL,
Yeah.
making it even easier to design, build, and manage complex serverless applications.
And as the serverless landscape continues to evolve at an incredible pace, I'm sure this DSL will keep pace, adding new features and capabilities to meet those ever-changing demands.
Absolutely. We're just scratching the surface of what's possible with serverless workflows.
Yeah.
And the DSL will play a key role in shaping that future. Who knows what amazing applications and services people will build with this technology? It's exciting to think about.
This has been an awesome exploration of the serverless workflow DSL.
It has been fun.
We've seen how it combines structure with flexibility, embraces open standards, and empowers you to automate just about anything in the serverless world.
For sure.
So take what you've learned, think about the possibilities from streamlining your business to building complex event-driven systems, and see what you can automate with this powerful tool. That's it for this deep dive. Catch you next time.